Hello, welcome to the first year of beer blog of 2010. Happy New Year to you, thanks for stopping by. I'm at work, we've just finished work, it's 9 o'clock at night, it's absolutely freezing outside. The thing about winter in this shop is that all of the beers on the shelves are pretty much at serving temperature. It's about 5 or 6 degrees inside, we've got a little heater that runs, doesn't really warm the place up, to be honest. So the nice thing is you can just wander over, get a beer off the shelf and drink it. And so that's what we're going to do. And the beer that we've chosen to do that with is from the Crown Brewery in Sheffield. It's a beer that I helped brew with them. It's Django Reinhardt Damson Double Porter. It's part of their Jazz series. Now the Crown Brewery is based at the Hillsborough Hotel in Sheffield. It's a tiny little 4-barrel micro. And they produce some really classic kind of English ales. They've got that lovely, fresh, clean character. The brewer there, Stuart, he uses lots of, not lots, but he's not afraid to experiment a little bit to produce interesting beers. And so this is one of the interesting beers that he's produced over the last 12 months. Now Stuart's an interesting guy. He works in the Crown Brewery, which is the basement of it's in the basement of the Hillsborough Hotel in Sheffield. Sheffield, of course, is a city in the north of England known for its kind of real ale culture. Now I first met Stuart at the Great British Beer Festival last year, 2009. And it was kind of one of those meetups that we'd exchanged a few emails, and I think we'd exchanged messages on Twitter. And he kind of came over and hooked up with me, and we actually spent most of the day together, just kind of wandering around, drinking. He's one of the guys that my better half insists that I'm having a bromance with, along with Phil at Beer Merchants, obviously. Now, Stuart was a really interesting guy to spend the day with at a beer festival, because as we walked around, it turned out that a lot of the beers that I really liked were from breweries that he'd worked at. He's worked at Acorn Brewery, he's worked at Kelham Island. They did a fantastic collaboration with Brooklyn Brewery. Their Brooklyn Smoked Porter was a real favourite of mine. And it turns out that he actually brewed a batch of that. He brewed Barnsley Bitter at Acorn, and now he's kind of running the brewery at the Hillsborough Hotel, the Crown Brewery in the basement there. And so this is a beer that we got together and did in October last year, and it's a Damson Porter. Basically, we decided we want to do something seasonal, so I said, look, let's do a dark beer, but let's do it with fruit. Let's use fruit as a source of fermentable sugar. And so that's what we did. There was about 10 pounds of Damsons went into the boil. It was a 4-barrel brew. The majority of it went for cask. There's very little of it left, so I feel a bit weird blogging about a beer that you can't find. But it's actually a really nice example of a kind of a seasonal beer with an unusual ingredient, and it's interesting. It was interesting spending the day with Stuart and doing the brew with him, because obviously with with a regular brew, what you're trying to do is make it more or less the same every time. It's kind of building that flavour profile that regular drinkers come to expect from your beers. With the specials, there's a little bit more chance to experiment. So it was quite interesting. As we went through the brew, we had an idea of what we wanted to get, but all the way through, Stuart sort of said, well, let's just do this differently. If we stop the sparge a bit early, then we'll have more, the wort will have more sugar in it, so there's the potential to ferment higher. And so what we ended up with was a little bit different to how we started out. Now, as you can see, it's a fantastic dark colour there. And on the nose, there's fantastic dark, sort of slightly earthy, smoky, malty notes. And that follows through on the palate as well. The carbonation of this is quite low. It's quite nice. It's almost like cask ale in a bottle. It's been bottled straight from the tank, and that's actually worked really well in this example. So what you get really, you get a lovely kind of rich coffee note. There's a fruitiness coming through from the Damsons as well, and then there's a lovely hot bitterness that builds in the finish. So there's a lot of things going on there. Sweet, slightly smoky, earthy, and then kind of underneath it all, because right at the end, when we'd messed around with the recipe and gone through and done this and done that, we got to the end of it and Stuart decided that He was going to use a Belgian yeast rather than an English yeast, which is why it's a Damson double porter, because we were trying to go for the Belgian double style, that dark sort of fruity, earthy, Trappist style beer. And in the end, he ended up pitching a Belgian yeast, and I was impressed and a little bit taken aback at how willing he was to play fast and loose with the original recipe. But actually, you know what? It's turned out fantastically well. It's big, sweet, lovely, fruity, smoky and earthy. It's really, really complex. I've not only had this out of the bottle, I've had it on draft. They had a bottle of, they had a cask of it at North Bar in Leeds, and I popped in and had some one evening, because you shouldn't really just judge beers out of the bottle, although that's what I do a lot of the time. And so that's a little bit of a story about the Crown Brewery in Sheffield. There's a bit of information there about Stuart Ross, the brewer, and then the beer that we brewed together, which isn't really available anywhere, which I feel bad about. Now, the other thing that Stuart did last year, which was really interesting, he did another collaborative brew with a guy called Pete Brown. Now, Pete has written a book called Hops and Glory, and again, here's another thing that you won't be able to rush out and buy, because there's only about 500 of these left in circulation. But basically, Hops and Glory is the story of IPA. Pete researched IPA until he was blue in the face and it drove him mad, and he basically brewed an IPA as authentically as he could at an original brewery in Burton, and took the cask of IPA on the original IPA route all around, across the oceans, all the way around to India, to see how that journey affected IPA and what came out at the end of it as opposed to what went in at the start of it. And so basically, Pete's year last year was promoting this book and drinking more IPA than any human being ever has before. And not only drinking it, but brewing it. And one of the places he brewed it was at the Crown Brewery in the basement of the Hillsborough Hotel in Sheffield. And so the second part of this blog is going to be talking a little bit about Hops and Glory, but also about the IPA that Pete Brown brewed with Stuart Ross down at the Crown Brewery in Sheffield. That was a lot of information in a very short time. You might want to go back and listen to that again. I'm going to really enjoy finishing up this bottle of beer. Tune in for part 2. We're going to talk about Hops and Glory and the IPA that Pete and Stuart brewed together. Thanks for stopping by. Cheers now.